Some say that brisket is the best bite in barbecue, but I gotta be honest. I think that beef ribs are just as good, if not even better. Today we're gonna smoke some beef ribs low and slow on our Pit Boss pellet grill. It's about 10 degrees out here, but that's not gonna stop us from making some good barbecue. On top of it, we're gonna use all those fat trimmings from the beef ribs to make a nice beef tallow. So stick along for the ride, you're not gonna wanna miss this. These ribs that I have here are beef chuck short ribs. As you can tell, they got a lot more meat than the beef back ribs. These things are pretty nice. So how we're going to prep this is we're going to take a sharp boning knife. I got this from Schmidt Bros Cutlery. And we're going to just trim all this fat back, as well as the silver skin that we see here. Now you want to make sure your knife is super sharp. And a good tip when actually trimming any meat for that matter, pop this in the freezer a couple minutes before you go to prep it, and this fat will harden up just a little bit more. It'll be a little easier to trim. So I'm going to trim away little by little. Always save your fat trimmings from beef. You can make beef tallow with them. So it might take some time, so just take your time, work it little by little. There's no rush here. Alright guys, the ribs are all trimmed up. Now the reason why we trim all the fat off these ribs and expose all this meat is because it actually allows the seasonings direct access to the meat, allowing all the flavors to sweat right in. And like I said, save all those fat trimmings in a container. We're going to use this to make a beef tallow. Always save your fat. Don't let any of it go to waste. Unlike pork ribs, with their beef ribs, we want to keep our membrane on. This is what keeps all that meat together. So you could score it if you would like, but I tend to just leave it alone. Now, like I always say, you don't need a binder, but I always like to use one. I'll throw down a little bit of olive oil or mustard. Here I'm using some oil, and we're going to spread it out, make sure we get a nice, even coating. Once you're done with the top, flip it over and do the same on the membrane side. Today, to season this, I'm going to use some SPG from Suckle Busters. I like to use a salt, pepper, garlic on all my beef, and then top it off with a little bit of Blackstone Steakhouse seasoning. But of course, you don't have to copy me. Use whatever seasonings you like. First, we'll season our membrane side with our SPG and our Steakhouse seasoning. Go ahead and flip your rack over and get a nice heavy coating on the top. I like to go a little heavier on the top because when we let this rest in the fridge, those flavors from those seasonings are going to sweat right into your ribs. And whenever you're seasoning anything, pat it in instead of rubbing. Rubbing will actually remove the seasoning off of the meat. And patting it in will actually help your seasonings adhere a little bit better. Once we're done getting seasoned up, we're going to pop this into the fridge, uncovered for about 15 minutes while we go get our grill heated up. We'll be smoking these on our Pit Boss Lexington today, using Pit Boss's apple blend. This blend has a nice subtle smoke flavor. I really love it. It's delicious. I think it'll pair perfectly with our beef ribs. All right, I got my Pit Boss set to 250. We're going to take our rack of ribs and toss it right in the middle here. We're going to let this sit in here for about an hour or so. Then we'll come out, take a look, throw in our thermometer probe, and once we hit an internal of around 160 to 170, or once the bark is set, then we'll proceed to our wrap. While this is cooking on here, we're going to jump right back inside and get working on our beef tallow. Now, beef tallow is super simple to make. We don't have a lot of trimmings here, but this will be just enough to be able to use for our beef ribs during our wrap. Now, how you make tallow is you get yourself a pot, fill the pot with just enough water to cover the bottom. You want to put this on 1 or 2. You want to keep it super low. You're better off going longer and lower than kicking up the heat too high and burning it. So throw that in there, and then just dump your trimmings right into the pot. Go ahead and spread them out. Make sure that the whole bottom is covered. We'll go ahead, throw our lid on, and we'll let this sit. All right, our tallow's on. It's been about 30-45 minutes. Now I'm going to add in my temperature probe. Smells delicious, getting some nice color on there. I'm going to add our probe into the thickest part of the meat. Now you want to make sure your probe isn't touching one of the bones, making direct contact with it. It'll give you an inaccurate reading, so make sure you're in the meat, thickest part of the meat. Again, we're going to leave this alone until an internal of around 160, 170, once it gets a nice bark over the top. Once it hits that point, we'll give it a wrap. As you can see here, our beef fat is starting to render down. Now, this is going to go a little quicker because these are some thin trimmings, but if you trim something like a brisket, and you have nice thick fat chunks, this could take a couple hours for you. So I'm just going to let any of this residual water boil off, and we'll be left with just the tallow. After about 2 hours of letting our trimming simmer, all our water is boiled off and we're left with this liquid gold here. Go ahead and take all the trimmings, transfer them to a bowl. I'm going to let these cool down before you throw them out. It's okay if you still have some small pieces left. We're going to strain this out. Grab yourself a jar or container to keep your tallow in, as well as a fine strainer and a paper towel. Of course, pour it carefully. This stuff is very hot. Now I'm going to let this all strain and I'll get back to you when it's finished. And there we go. Just like that, we have ourselves some nice, beautiful beef tallow. Today we're using this to add right on top of our beef ribs while we wrap it. This will help add in extra flavor and moisture to our ribs while we finish up our cook. We're at an internal of 173. Let's take a look. We'll check this bark and see if it's ready to wrap. Well, this is getting some beautiful color on it. The bark seemed to set up in some spots, but it's a little soft in some others. So I might just push this out another 5 degrees or so before we pull this off to wrap. We're back out at the grill, 178. Bark is looking a lot better. Nice and mahogany. So let's pull this probe out, and we're gonna bring this over to our butcher's paper. Got our butcher's paper laid out. Let's go ahead and grab these beef ribs, toss them right on our butcher's paper. It's delicious. Wrapping your beef ribs should be just like wrapping a brisket. It's gonna be the same process, and I'll show you how I do it. Now, one trick to get your butcher's paper from flying everywhere when you're wrapping is to actually spray this down with some water. Now, I would do that today, except I'm in the single digits. So if I were to spray water on there, it would just instantly freeze. So I'm gonna work a little fast because it is super cold. We're gonna take some of our beef tallow, which is now solidified into a butter-like consistency. We'll throw it right on top. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave a little bit of room behind the beef rib. We're going to fold it over like this. Now you're going to want to fold in these corners, the left and the right, and fold it all the way down your paper. Bear with me, guys. Okay. Now pick this up, fold it over, place one hand here, and pull this in tight. We're going to flip this over one more time. What this is going to do is our tallow side, our meat side is going to be up. Make sure your meat side is up. Then we're going to take this extra right here and fold it under and make a platform under our beef ribs. And we're going to take this, place it right back into our grill. And now from here, you can stick your thermometer probe right back through the paper. Try to find one of those meaty areas. Now that it's covered, I know it is a little bit harder. Again, you want to make sure you're not touching the bone, because if you're touching the bone, you're going to get an inaccurate reading of the internal temp. We had a mess up there, but we found our spot. Now we have our probe set. We're going to leave this completely alone until our internal hits around 200 degrees. Once it hits 200, I'll meet you back at the grill. Our internal is now at 203. It's time to pull these off. Set it right on our cutting board. Now we're going to bring this inside and let rest for about 10 to 15 minutes before we cut into it. So we have our beef ribs here. We let these rest for about 15 minutes. And when it comes to this butcher's paper, I like to just cut right down it with some scissors. Look at that. These look delicious. Slice a piece of this off. Look at all those juices. Super juicy. We got a little bit of a smoke ring here from the pellet grill. And I gotta say that beef tallow did a beautiful job keeping these moist. And this is just super juicy. Look at that glistening. Everybody hates when you give it the squeeze, but you know we have to. Oh, look at that. Can't wait to give these a try. For a total cook time of around 4.5 hours, this recipe was pretty simple. Now it might take a little while, but I think it's definitely worth the wait. Let's go ahead and give it a bite. Super tender and super juicy. Our seasoning choice was perfect on this. Kind of tastes like a nice tender steak. I definitely think you gotta give these a try. If you're still here, thank you for watching. Be sure to give this recipe a try and let me know your thoughts down below.